We've seen a record number of traffic deaths in Washington state for multiple years now, and this bill really targets at making sure our law enforcement officers, we hear that they have constrained resources, so we want to make sure that they are enforcing the traffic safety laws that attribute most to road safety.
Well, you're hearing from Representative Chipalo Street right there, the Democrat from the 37th District in Southeast Seattle, breaking down a new traffic safety measure that has a lot more to it than you might think. What's happening with this bill? Plus, some new developments on rent stabilization in Olympia. Oh, and there's this multi-billion-dollar sized budget hole that isn't looking a lot better after some threats of funding cuts from the federal government. We've got all this and a whole lot more this week on a very special Patrons First episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm with none other than Representative Chipalo Street. Representative Street, I really appreciate you making time for me, especially because we're right before this town hall you have coming up with Representative Tomiko Santos and Senator Saldana. It's on Saturday, the 22nd. Isn't that right?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And we're going to be meeting with the full 37th delegation. We'll be live and in person, and we're really looking forward to hearing from everyone about what's on your mind. And there is a lot. The town hall is right at ACRS, which is a few blocks away from the intersection of MLK and Rainier. Great public transit, great parking. Please come out.
All right. Yeah, we're talking about 10 to 11:30 a.m. at the Asian Counseling and Referral Service. Again, if you're keeping score at home, 3639 Martin Luther King Way South. A big thanks to you, Representative Street, and thanks to City Grind Espresso, too, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Find them on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks always to our show patrons, Rob and Keen. Appreciate your support over the past week. And here's the deal, folks. When you become a patron, starting at just $5 a month, you can always give more. You access content like this first. We answer your questions on the show, too. It's a great deal. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. And finally, I should give a big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of this podcast airs on Converge most often Wednesday nights at 7. All right, we're going to get going. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, Representative Street, I wanted to check in on, well, I guess as many of the top issues for your caucus as we can on the show, but can we please start with House Bill 1217, which covers rent stabilization? So this would limit rent and fee increases to 7% during any 12-month period and prohibit rent and fee increases during the first 12 months of a lease. So the bill also adds some notification and penalties for the property owner for any increases of over 3%, caps late fees and security deposits. Can you help me on the why here to start? This issue I know has been moving around the legislature for a few years, but why here, why now?
Yeah, I mean, I think as many people in the district know, the price of housing is just going through the roof. And in the 37th, we have over 40% of our constituents are renters, and that's really impacting their ability to plan for the future, not understanding how much they're going to be spending on the housing, because housing is one of the largest expenses that a family has. And so rent stabilization is just an attempt to try and give renters a little bit more predictability in what their expenses will be for the next year, while also preventing some unscrupulous landlords from gouging tenants on rent. And there's a lot of great landlords out there that keep rent at like decent rates, but there's some that do gouge folks, and rent stabilization is just a way to prevent that gouging. Like, we're not going to bring down housing prices strictly through this. Like, that is also a market based system, and we've been doing a bunch in the legislature to ease permitting, allow more houses to be built at lower costs, and those are the things that will really bring down rent prices in the long term. But while the market is out of whack, we need to provide these very sensible protections for renters.
Got it. And I guess I wanted to go a little bit further down that path with landlords. I hear from a lot of them, and I'm sure you do too in your work. And I know you've heard some of this pushback, like, hey, my King County property taxes went up over 5% last year, and then you throw in a few more costs. That's way more than this 7% cap, which means I'm losing money as a landlord. Do you have concerns that House Bill 1217 could have a chilling effect on landlords or even housing supply? I know some landlords have brought that up too.
No, personally, I don't. And I speak of that from experience. Like, I own some rental properties in King County and Pierce County. And the thing that I think people need to remember is that the largest expense that a landlord has is their mortgage, and that is fixed. And so I completely agree that costs are going up. However, the amount that a cost goes up for a small fraction of your total expenses far outweighs how much you're able to raise rent, which is your complete revenue. you're putting me on the spot right here. We could do some quick math. Say like
Sure,
your
sure. Yeah.
total rent is, or your costs are $100, and
Hmm.
$80 of that is from your mortgage, and $20 of that are from variable costs. Say
Okay.
those
Okay.
double, you now have $20 more of variable costs. However, if your rent was just covering your expenses and your rent was $100, if you raise rent 10%, you have brought in $10 of extra revenue for that year.
Hmm.
If you do it again, you have
Okay.
another 20. If you do it again, you have another 30. And so that really outpaces your small marginal increases in expenses when you have fixed mortgages or fixed loans.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the quick math on that. And I guess I just wanted to put this all in perspective, Representative Street, because House Bill 1217, it by itself is not going to solve our affordable housing crisis. Can you talk to me about how this, I guess, fits in with other housing policies that the state is working on?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did 2 years ago was a missing middle bill, which tried to increase or density across the state in all areas that are zoned residential. It allows for modest townhomes, fourplexes, so that we can get more density and more units on the market. We've also increased or expedited permitting of larger buildings so that we can get these to market faster. And there's been a month more, and we'll talk about transit-oriented development, which is
Yes. Yeah.
another idea or tool in our toolbox that we're moving this year.
Yeah, yep. And that House Bill 1110, very topical here in Seattle. The Seattle City Council, actually this week, with its comprehensive plan committee, is working on that, how to respond to the deadline for the state, which is coming up right here in June. They need to make sure that they're in line with House Bill 1110, this missing middle bill, as they work on so many different things with the comprehensive plan. I'll touch on that in just a second here, but let's jump on this issue here. House Bill 1491, the transit-oriented development we're talking about here. I guess when we talk about this, I know it's easy to get into the weeds here, but maybe I can just cut to it. How would passing House Bill 1491 create a situation where not only will the state pass a law for more affordable housing near transit? That sounds great, but also make it more attractive to developers to say, yes, I want to make that investment. That's such an important part of this.
Yeah, so I think about transit-oriented development as just one of the many tools we have. We mentioned the missing middle bill, which allows more density in any residential neighborhood. Transit-oriented development is really targeted at the areas around public investments in mass transit. So that would be around a light rail station or around a bus rapid transit stop. That it does not mean any bus stop. That means these are like the BRT, the bus rapid transit, or the Swift buses that have specialized infrastructure. So this isn't coming to any bus stop anywhere in a city or in King County. This is around places that we've made specific investments around public transit. And there we're talking about technically it's something called a floor aspect ratio,
Yep.
or
Here we
floor
go.
area
The FAR.
ratio.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
I would not do that to you or myself to try and explain that.
Right. Right.
But I generally think of it as like 5+ story buildings where you have mixed use on the first floor. That could be commercial, that could be childcare.
Okay.
But expanding the size of these around these transit stops, whereas something like missing middle does infill within the rest of a residential community. And we've been working on this for a while. One of the big compromises that we made with developers is understanding that as we build up these large complexes, it could displace people in community. And so the original bill mandated that developers provide a level of affordability in these new buildings. And we think that's great because we know that everything can't be market rate. There is a bunch of community members who need this workforce housing. And the big compromise was, if a developer builds one of these buildings, we will mandate affordability, but we will also give them access to a multifamily tax exemption, that colloquially referred to as the MFTE. This makes the building pencil over a longer amount of time. It also works really nicely with rent stabilization because rent stabilization exempts new buildings for the first 12 years.
That's right.
So that they're able to build them, they're able to make sure that their rents make a building pencil and they're not encumbered by that. So a lot of these policies work together to make sure that we have a better functioning market, and we also protect renters and tenants.
Got it. And I know that's something you want to do in the 37th. Can you look ahead into the future for me, Representative Street, and tell me Because I know the 37th district has light rail running right through it. You've got some development happening there. How is the 37th district potentially going to change with these different new laws as they're passed, or if they're passed? How is the 37th district going to change with these new kind of housing priorities put in place?
I mean, unfortunately, I think the 37th has been sort of the experiment lab for a lot of these policies in the past when they didn't have the great affordability measures built into them. And so we have seen a lot of the displacement in the 37th. It's great that we will have this going forward for any future development, but a lot of that has already happened. We want to make sure that we don't do this to other communities, and that when we are doing this in the 37th, we are making sure that we learn from the mistakes of the past. But like, we already have light rail. There's been a lot of development around light rail, and a lot of those things did displace people. And so we have to recognize where we have made errors and make sure we do not do that going forwards.
Got it. And just to get one last wonky piece put through here, I mentioned that comprehensive plan process that the city of Seattle is really working to get through. They're behind schedule on it, I know. I'm trying to figure out how a new bill like this impacts the process for Seattle. Would Seattle have to put this into action immediately? House Bill 1491, is there some grace period for them to work on this in terms of city leaders, or what can you tell me there?
Yeah, you want to talk about wonky things, just bring up the
Yeah.
comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I
My
know.
general understanding of the comprehensive plan is that
Yes.
that is a 10-year planning that cities have to go
Right.
through.
That's
Seattle's actually in the midst of it right now, and many people are probably hearing about that at local town halls with their council members.
Yep.
However, what is nice about this bill is that it says, hey, we understand that there's these sort of regimented planning periods to the comprehensive plan. This doesn't have to take effect until 2029, when cities are required to do an update to the comprehensive plan planning that they're doing right now. So it recognizes the hard work that's going into the comprehensive plan currently, and sort of slipstreams into that existing process.
Okay, thank you very much, because it's something that I know can confuse a lot of people, but I know you're going to be talking to people about building, about rent stabilization, and so much more at your town hall. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. All right, well, up next, improving access to dual credit programs for students in our state, especially when it comes to career and technical education, CTE. Why is this a focus of the legislature this year, and what could this mean? Coming up on Now Hear This. Well, you probably heard the statistic from your high school guidance counselor. Education after high school is critical in today's job market, but colleges and universities around our state and around the country are suffering as fewer and fewer students decide to take the jump towards a degree after high school. We're talking about bachelor degrees, but also the CTE route, career and technical education, as explained by Representative Vandana Slatter, the Democrat from the 48th District, on TVW recently.
It's been a decline slightly over the last decade since the Great Recession, but has been a much steeper decline since COVID. And I think the pandemic definitely has been a factor in this. And essentially what we're seeing is that the decline has been steeper.
Representative Street, I learned recently that between the fall of 2019 and 2022, community and tech college enrollment went down 25%, public four-year universities by 10%. I know that COVID had a lot to do with that. It sounds like this bill that we're talking about here, 1273, is trying to change that slide. Tell us what's going on and why you support House Bill 1273. What's this bill going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want all of our kids to go to college. And maybe college is a wrong misnomer. Like, basically, I think everyone wants learning to continue after high school. For many of us, that has been college, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the only path for kids today. There's apprenticeship programs, there's community and technical colleges, there's vocational programs. And so making sure that people can continue to learn is the priority. And this CTE program does that. We understand that not everyone but we have had many programs traditionally in high school. So there's AP, IB, college and high school. And that says, like, hey, you're learning great things in high school. It's of a college caliber. Why don't you get credit for that in college? We also have programs in high schools that would accrue to apprenticeships and other vocational industries. Why wouldn't they get credit for those things when they're doing it in high school as well? And that's what the CTE dual credit program is really all about.
Got it. And I also read that back in 2023, more than 56,000 students were enrolled in CTE dual credit courses, not including Running Start students. And I just really found it remarkable that a lot of these kids accessing these programs we're talking about a very diverse group of students from all sorts of socioeconomic levels. And I feel like from that perspective, too, it's important to you to keep these kind of programs going.
For sure. I mean, so many of these vocational programs get people into jobs immediately, like very good paying jobs. And often they need some kind of licensure or, again, education after high school. And so why wouldn't we want to accelerate that and give people credit for the work that they're already doing in high school towards getting these great jobs that are in our communities? And as you mentioned before, college enrollment's going down. Lord knows what's going to happen with this new administration and how that's going to affect financial aid. Like, many of our students are coming from families who this may be their first time going to college, who may not have the financial resources to support them in college. And this has been one of the great things about programs like the Washington College Grant Program that we've implemented,
Right.
that provides assistance to anyone graduating from a public high school going to college. But we should also be doing that for CTE programs and vocational programs and make sure that they get the credit that they've earned in high school towards that degree, so they don't have to spend money on classes that they already know and have already mastered.
Got it. And I know we're going to talk budget in just a minute here, but I do want to dive in a little bit early and ask, how do you push a bill through like this during such a challenging fiscal future for the state? Can you talk about that?
I mean, that is the sort of $1 million question for so many people here in Olympia.
I think multi-billion-dollar question, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've passed 214 bills, or around 200 bills off the floor already, for a total combined of like 40 or $45 million, which is an amazingly small amount of spend compared to what we usually do. So many of these bills, we will try and find nexus with folks who are already paying for this, like a fee that could support these things, or being reimbursed, working with, say, industry that says, I have a need for this type of worker. Is there a way that, hey, you could fund this CTE program that trains workers for that specific industry? Finding those good public-private partnerships that can really sort of advance the end goals that we'd like to see for our community and for building this great economy that we have.
That is a very interesting twist on that. Thank you for bringing that piece up too. But I did want to move on to some other legislation you've been pushing for, and I'm talking about House Bill 1215 on traffic safety. So this is a measure you have said will help ensure officers are going after major traffic and driving issues rather than a broken taillight, let's say. Why is a bill like this needed?
I mean, we've seen record numbers of traffic deaths on our roads. I think it was 800 2 years ago, 600 this past year, and that's just unacceptable. We've also heard from our law enforcement community that they have far too many things to do, and I agree with them. Like, they are responding to mental health crises, they're responding to safety issues in our community, and they're trying to police and patrol our roads. And so let's make sure that they're spending their time on the most impactful things. I like to sort of use the crass analogy of, if you saw someone running down the street wielding a machete, you would want our law enforcement officers to go address that, as opposed to writing a parking ticket. Yes, parking is still illegal. Yes, we want to make sure that people are parking in the right places, but the guy with the machete is the priority. That's the thing that is endangering safety. Let's make sure that law enforcement officers are targeting drunk drivers, they're targeting dangerous drivers, are targeting distracted drivers on their cell phones, as we see that spike, because those lead to accidents on our road. And in jurisdictions that have implemented similar types of policies, we've seen double, like 200% increase in DUI arrests. Like, that's exactly what I want our law enforcement officers targeting on the roads.
I gotcha. Where is this bill right now? Is it going to be moving through the session? I know it's been stuck in a few different committee hearings, et cetera, but where are we right now with this?
Yeah, unfortunately, like many other bills this session, it has met its fate and did not move out of committee.
I see.
Yeah,
but it's a process. It's something you're going to be bringing back, it sounds like.
It is a process. I'm so grateful for the advocates that have been working with me on this. We're looking to bring in more folks to our coalition, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I think this is a great example of a group. Like AAA supports it, which is a road safety group. And so, like, building the coalition to show how it advances everyone's priorities is great. And while road safety is the primary goal here, many people in the 37th know that communities of color, our native populations, are targeted at higher rates with traffic stops. And so it has a great side benefit of equity on it. If equity is not the thing that you want to sort of support this bill on, then please just focus on the traffic safety and the folks driving on our roads.
I got it. But I did want to take this bigger picture, if I could, with you, Representative Street, because this bill really seems to fit within the work you do with the Legislative Black Caucus, which I should mention, at 14 members, is the largest it's ever been in state history. Help us understand the work this caucus is doing, especially when it comes to law enforcement. I know you're trying to avoid these stops where a lot of people of color get pulled over for a broken taillight or something along those lines. I know the governor's been talking a lot about hiring more officers, spending $100 million per biennium to do that. But I know the caucus wants some more investments in social services too. Can you talk about the Black Caucus and the work it's been doing over the past session here?
Sure. We have the largest Black Caucus this side of the Mississippi, which is just a monumental testament to the work that we've been doing, sort of building within the Democratic Party and having people who are prepared to come and be the next generation of leaders. And it's great to work with so many of them.
Not too long ago, it was just Eric Pettigrew all by himself. So yeah, that's
sure.
That's
for sure.
It's
in the change in the short amount of time is just mind blowing when you go back and look at that. But as you mentioned, Governor Ferguson has put out he campaigned on $100 million for cops. He has continued to sort of state that as a priority. And I applaud a politician for carrying through on a campaign promise. However, those of us in the Legislative Black Caucus know that only adding law enforcement while we cut social services doesn't end well for our community. Many people in our community do want law enforcement, but we want to make sure that we also have the supports so that folks don't end up in the criminal justice system. And we've been doing a lot of work on this on Bill, I think it's 2015, to make sure that when we talk about law enforcement and community safety does not only equate to law enforcement officers. There are so many more things that get us the end goals of a safe community that aren't folks with badges and a gun. So that could be co-responders for people in crisis. That could be additional funding for our judicial system to make sure that juveniles are placed in community care as opposed to in a youth jail when those people can be safely placed out of that system because they will have better rehabilitation and lower rates of recidivism. There are so many different ways that we can look at comprehensive public safety as more than just a police officer, and making sure that that money can be used for that so that we get the intended outcomes that we want is really the end goal of, I believe, Governor Ferguson's request for $100 million for cops. He wants to make sure that our communities are safe, and we believe that there are multiple ways we can do that.
Got it. Again, House Bill 2015, we'll track that one as well. A big story happening with the city of Seattle right now as they expand their CARE department, community assisted response and engagement, these 911 alternative teams going out throughout the city. So this is a big topic, I know, for the state and for the city of Seattle too. So I appreciate you breaking that down. All right, well, coming up next here, as we talk about what Olympia lawmakers want to spend money on, we got to take on a budget deficit that doesn't seem to be getting any smaller, especially in light of possible federal cuts coming down the line. That part of the story is coming up on What's Next. Representative Street, I wanted to talk about what's ahead in the budget for you. It's not just this $100 million the governor's asking for with officers, et cetera, but I've just heard this deficit could be as big as $10 billion to $15 billion over the next 4 years. Can you talk to me about what's going on in Olympia right now? I know the governor hasn't been really keen on the idea of new taxes, new revenue, but are those issues still in play? What's happening?
Yeah, for sure. We actually just got our last revenue forecast yesterday, I believe it was, and that came in another 900 million down. So I think we're looking at a 12 to 15 billion dollar shortfall right now.
Wow.
One of the things to be sort of clear about is people have said, why is this only Washington? And this is only Washington in certain ways because we do 4-year projections. Many states just do 2-year projections. And we look at a 2-year budget deficit, that's, I believe, a $2 to $4 billion hole, which is on the order of magnitude of some other states out there. While when you look out at the 4-year projection, that's where you get a much larger gap. And so while it is good to project, those 4-year estimates are much harder to get good estimates on. And so while we will create a budget that is balanced over 4 years, I think it's important to note that this isn't only Washington. And while we do have an issue now, we need to address it. And we should address or consider all options that we have on the table. The governor proposed a set of cuts. All cuts to these budgets are meaningful to real people. And so when I look at the budget, I want to make sure that we save as many programs that we currently have. We have made great promises to people. There's programs like we mentioned before earlier in this show, Washington College Grant, where we're making sure that college is accessible and affordable for folks. Fair Start for Kids, where we're expanding early learning to more and more families, or the Working Families Tax Credit, where we're giving people their tax dollars back to them in the form of a rebate. Like, these are all great programs that the Democrats have fought for, and they're so popular that they're growing faster than we expected and are costing us more and more money. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. Like, these are things that people want. We are giving them the goods.
Right.
However, we may have to slow down how fast we expand eligibility for those. We may have to trim what benefits we give, so we can first preserve what we have promised to people and what people are getting before we expand it to other people. And I think that would be a first place to start as we look at potential cuts, as well as revenue. Like, you're not going to be able to raise your way out of $15 billion in revenue. There is 0% chance that we can cut our way out of this. If we were to cut our way out of this, there was a all cuts budget that was like $5 billion in Medicare cuts. An optional thing in Medicare cuts is kidney dialysis, and we all know that you die without kidney dialysis. And so those are the types of cuts that we must avoid.
Got it. Can you briefly touch on this? Is our state preparing for even more cuts coming our way because of potential federal budget cuts out there that could cut programs like Medicaid, things like that? Maybe that's going to necessitate a special session in Olympia. What do you know about what's ahead? And I know we're talking about a federal administration that's a bit of a roller coaster right now, but is there any preparation going on with that at the state level? I have to imagine so.
Man, if I had a crystal ball and could tell you what the administration was going to do, I'd go to the stock market and be a millionaire.
Right.
So my personal approach to this is that we have to deal with the problems that are in front of us right now. We know that if we did an all cuts budget, that would be like 1.1 billion cuts to higher ed. That is untenable. And so we need to raise revenue to do that. That is one place that we are, I believe, sort of potentially vulnerable to actions from the administration. We've seen how they're trying to pull back funding to different research institutions. Washington State and University of Washington are two great research institutions that pull in hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government. And so if that is a course that the administration takes, then we will probably have to adjust when that hits. Another thing is we spend $26 billion on subsidized healthcare in this state. 16 billion of that comes from the feds. If the feds were to pull that back, that's another order of magnitude that we can't raise or cut our way out of. I think that's a completely different conversation that we would have to have if that were to pass. I am hopeful that reality will prevail and he will realize that many of his own constituents in red states are just as, if not more, dependent on Medicaid than many of the Democrats. And it's crazy that we're talking about who would get a benefit and would we cut it based on political values. We should be looking out for all of our neighbors. But something as fundamental as Medicaid, I believe reasonable minds will prevail. And if it doesn't, then that is just something that we have to deal with separately, given the size of that issue.
Got it. Thank you for that. I wanted to quickly recap what's happening this weekend. You're with Representative Tomiko Santos, Senator Saldana, Saturday the 22nd from 10 to 11:30 at the Asian Counseling and Referral Service Center there. What do you want people to know about that? They're supposed to be coming with questions, and I'm hoping you're going to have some answers too.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be responsive to the community. There's so much going on both at the state level in terms of policies, in terms of the budget that we just talked about. There's a ton going on at the federal level. Thankfully, the state has implemented a ton of policies to protect Washingtonians from potential federal threats. We have a great attorney general who's filing lawsuits left and right, and we have a set of legislators working with him to make sure that we pair legislation with anything that he needs. So we have a ton of updates that we can give to our community. We'd also love to hear about the issues that are impacting folks the most. And the last time we did a town hall, we had to do it remotely. And so we're really looking forward to getting together in person and just creating that community and exchanging information both ways.
I love it. Before I leave you, I'm always fascinated to hear your stories of your career as a soccer referee. You've reffed games for the Sounders and a number of other big-time teams. Just wanted to ask, any chance FIFA is going to pull you out of retirement so you can officiate some World Cup matches when they come to Seattle? What do you got?
Oh man, I can only hope. I will guarantee that I will stay in Seattle this whole time just in case they need an extra referee. I will say I will do a great job, but if they do that, we have hit some kind of huge issue
Oh,
where like referees have gotten in an accident and no one can be flown in. Like that would be a crisis moment. I would love to take advantage of it, but I really do hope that we don't get to that point.
okay. That's fair. That's fair. Representative Chipalo Street, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me anytime.
And thanks everybody listening to this Patrons First podcast of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics, state politics too. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. If you're not a patron, do it. For as little as $5 a month on Patreon would be greatly appreciated. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.